Chapter 17 of The Missing Chums by Franklin W. Dixon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Capture. The men in the cave lost no time in taking up the pursuit. They had been sleeping in their clothes and, once aroused, hurried out of the cave in search of the fugitives. The boys raced across the rocks. Behind them they could hear shouts as the gangsters called to each other. Then came the crash of a revolver as one of the men pumped shot after shot in their direction. Biff sprawled full length on the rocks. "Are you hurt?" asked Joe, stopping to help him rise. "No, I'm all right," gasped Biff, scrambling to his feet. He had suffered bruises, but seemed otherwise uninjured. However, when he began to run again, Joe noticed that he was limping and his progress was slower than formerly. Frank had the battered flashlight, but he did not dare switch it on for fear of revealing their whereabouts to the men. The latter, however, were stumbling along behind, following the trail by reason of the noise the boys made in their mad flight toward the trees. The men had the advantage in that they knew every inch of the rocky ground. The boys had to proceed more cautiously because it was unfamiliar to them, especially to Chet and Biff. Biff was limping along in the rear, and Joe purposely slowed down his pace so as to remain with his chum. But the delay was fatal. Out of the darkness came one of their pursuers, and with a growl of triumph he flung himself at Biff. His arms encircled the lad's legs in a perfect tackle, and Biff went down with a crash. Joe wheeled about and plunged upon them, striking out desperately to fight off Biff's attacker. They struggled fiercely in the darkness. Joe felt his fist crash into the man's face, and he heard a grunt of pain. Biff was wriggling out of his assailant's grasp, and the boys might indeed have made their escape had it not been that the other men came running up out of the shadows. With a roar of fury, two of them plunged at the boys and hauled them away from their comrade. "After the other two!" shouted a voice which they recognized as that of Red. "They're heading for the bushes!" Joe and Biff found themselves roughly hauled to their feet, their arms held tightly behind them. They heard the clatter of footsteps as two of the other men ran after Frank and Chet. "Back to the cave with them," growled Red. "Looks like we've got one of the guys that helped them get away. I've been thinking all day that there was someone hanging around here that we didn't know about." The lads were shoved and pushed ahead of their captors, dragged and bundled across the rocks until they reached the cave. Then they were roughly shoved through the entrance into the light of the fire. "Ah, I thought so," declared Red. "One of the guys that tried to help them get away." He peered closer at Joe. "Blessed if it ain't one of those two boys that was in the boat with the Hardys that day." One of the other men ordered the boys to sit down, and they crouched beside the stirred-up fire, sick at heart, wondering how it fared with Frank and Chet. When Joe and Biff were captured, it was Chet's first impulse to turn and go back, but a warning shout from Frank restrained him. "Keep running," he called. "If they're caught, we'll have a chance to get help." The wisdom of this course flashed through Chet's mind at once. If they went to the aid of their comrades, they would probably all be captured, and in a worse position than before. But if two, or even one, managed to escape, it would be possible to bring help to the island and effect the release of the others. Chet heard Frank crash into the undergrowth. It was pitch dark, and although he tried to follow, he knew he had left the trail. He did not call out because he was afraid of revealing his whereabouts to the men behind, but he blundered on, hoping to catch up with Frank. As for the latter, he was quite unaware of Chet's predicament. Chet crashed into the bushes. Branches whipped his face. Roots gripped his feet. He struggled on through the dense growth, blindly, in the darkness. Far ahead of him, he could hear Frank making his way through the underbrush, but when he tried to go toward the sound, he found that his sense of direction was confused. He struggled on for some time. Suddenly, he saw a patch of gray light ahead. It was the open sky, and he soon plunged out of the undergrowth into a rocky clearing. He breathed a sigh of relief. But the relief was short-lived. A dark figure loomed up before him. He dodged swiftly to one side, but a huge hand caught at his clothing. He was spun violently around, and then he was caught by the collar, despite his struggles. "Got you," grunted the dark figure with satisfaction. "Now, if we can only get the other—" He said no more, but shoved Chet before him across the rocks. Then it was that Chet found that instead of fleeing further away from the cave, he had really made a circle in the wood and had emerged directly into the clearing again. He was sick with disappointment. He wriggled and twisted in the grasp of his captor, but the man was too strong for him, and he shook Chet vigorously, tripping his feet from under him. "None of that! You come along with me," he rasped. And in a few minutes Chet was shoved back into the cave, where he found Biff Hooper and Joe Hardy crouched silently beside the fire with downcast faces. Frank alone had escaped. Frank knew that Chet had got lost, but he did not dare call out, for he could also hear the running tramp of feet that told him their pursuers had not yet given up the chase. If he could only reach the cove and get the motorboat started, he would be able to go over to the mainland for help. If only one escaped, it would be sufficient to save the others. He could not afford to risk his own capture in seeking Chet. He crashed on through the bushes, trying to make as little noise as possible, but he was off the trail, and the tangled undergrowth was growing denser with every forward step he took. He still clutched the flashlight that had been the cause of their undoing. He was glad he had found it, because in the pitch blackness he was unable to find his way. He could hear the roar of the waves, but they appeared to come from all sides, and he was unable to judge accurately the route to the shore. Frank decided he would not make use of the flashlight until it was absolutely necessary. There was too much danger that its gleam might be seen by one of the searchers, and he knew that the gang would not give up the chase as long as they knew he was on the island. "Perhaps they don't know there were two of us," he thought. "If Joe can convince them that he rescued Chet and Biff single-handedly, they won't know about me, and they won't keep on searching." In this lay his only hope, in this and in the chance that he would be able to reach the motorboat and make his escape before being seen. But if the gangsters knew he was still free, they would leave no stone unturned to find him, as they would know that if he once left the island, they were lost. He blundered about in the deep thicket, turning vainly this way and that. Great vines trailed across his face. He brushed aside stubborn branches and soggy wet leaves. He stumbled over roots and little bushes. The deep grass rustled and hissed at his feet. There was no other way. He would have to use the flashlight. The darkness was impenetrable. Trees and bushes enclosed him. He could not see where he was going. He switched on the light, and to one side descried a sort of passage among the bushes, so he headed in that direction. He managed to get free of the worst of the vines and the thick foliage, and found himself in a forest aisle. He went down it in the direction of the booming surf. His heart beat quickly at the thought that he was now free, and that he would soon be back at the boat. What had happened to Chet? He judged that his chum was either captured now or lost in the grove. Frank knew that he could not wait to learn Chet's fate, because any delay would be fatal to them all. He had switched out the flashlight and was plunging along through the darkness when the forest aisle suddenly took a twist, and he found himself again floundering in the midst of trees and trailing vines that entangled him. Frank switched on the flashlight again, and a second later he heard a grim voice from close by. "Throw up your hands." He wheeled about and found himself suddenly bathed in a ring of light. Someone was standing only a few feet away with a flashlight leveled at him, and in the beam of the flashlight he could see a glittering revolver aimed directly toward him. "Throw up your hands," rasped the voice again, "or you'll be shot." Slowly, Frank raised his hands above his head. "That's better. Now, march back ahead of me. Back to the cave, young fellow. We've got you all now. Forward, march." End of chapter 17.